Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining. Let's get started. We're right on time, and with that, we can keep up to the schedule. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Today, I will talk about enterprise and multi-tier Power BI deployments with Azure DevOps, aka Application Lifecycle Management for Power BI, and how to deal with that. First, I will briefly introduce myself. My name is Mark. I'm working as a data analytics consultant at McCall, a Dutch Microsoft partner. Working there for 4 years now, but my experience is a little bit more than that. I work with Power BI for roughly 6 years. I actually tell everyone always, I started with Power BI when Power BI turned from green into yellow, when it became a product and was separated from SharePoint. So 6 years experience and 3 years in a row awarded as Data Platform MVP right now, and especially focusing on Power BI. Other than that, last year I also received recognition as Fast Track Recognized Solution Architect by the Power BI CAT team and Microsoft Certified Trainer. On any of these social channels, feel free to reach out to me anytime with everything Power BI. I'm completely fine with that. Short notice for everyone who is willing to take one. At the end of this session, there in the front here, there are stickers and coasters with Power Beer on it. I'm that geek that thinks it's a nice idea to combine my two biggest hobbies together, Power BI and beer. So I made coasters and stickers, got enough of them, so feel free to pick them at the end of the session. As I told you, I'm from the Netherlands. Doesn't mean that I live in Amsterdam. Actually, I live close to a place that you probably know as Gouda, from the cheese. We pronounce it as Gouda, actually. But it's, I live 3 kilometers from there, and it also doesn't mean that I eat a lot of cheese, although I do like it, of course. So back to the topic of today. What we're going to cover today is first we will have a quick stop at the evolution of BI. What are we actually talking about and why is it important to care about application lifecycle management for Power BI? Then we will have a look at the native deployment pipelines that Power BI brings to the table with Power BI Premium. And as third topic, we will look at different deployment frameworks and how these frameworks will help us in structuring our deployment setup for our Power BI artifacts and move them from stage to stage in the Power BI service. Of course, we will also do a quick comparison. What is a native Power BI deployment pipeline compared to the capabilities that we have with Azure DevOps? And we will briefly stop and talk about data flows. How do we handle this with data flows, as they have a slightly different developing experience than all the Power BI desktop files. So, first, our way of working. If we talk about our way of working, there are a lot of things that have changed. And you might wonder, yeah, this guy has just 6 years of experience, so what can he tell about a change in our way of working? Well, I can tell you my previous employer was pretty classic way of working. They didn't really work agile, everything was waterfall. But nowadays, we are very busy. We are doing a million things at the same time. Actually, I'm doing that myself as well, and to keep it very accurate, I just received an email and a phone call from one of my coworkers that we won a new sales cycle, which was just 2 minutes before I stepped up to the stage here. So I tried to do as many things as I can at the same time, which brings a lot of challenges with it, obviously. If we look at that, how that affects our way of working with delivering our BI artifacts, our Power BI artifacts, if we look at a classic approach, it would have been waterfall. So we first gather the requirements, then we collect all the data that we need to deliver this solution. We explore the data, start cleansing and modeling this data. Finally, we report on it, and we start talking about phase 2 of this development with our end users. And now we actually passed 2 years. This is very classic, and this is actually my own experience at my previous employer. When there was a new reporting requirement, it took very long before we finally could get our hands on the data and actually do something. However, nowadays, we are starting to work agile, or we are already doing that, hopefully. And with that, these iterations are much shorter. And with these short iterations, we manage to deliver artifacts sooner and faster in smaller artifacts, but with that, we can continuously change and adapt to the new requirements of our stakeholders. But it also brings a challenge to the table, like how are we going to handle the versioning and the deployment around all the things that we deliver? So, if we compare that to the evolution of BI, this is a quick view on how these things are related to our way of working. The evolution of BI, first we really talked about IT to the end user, the first wave of BI, corporate BI. If you put that in tools, I would say you will be using Cognos or something here. Very classical BI, and IT is building reports and pushing it to the end users. Here's your report that you ask us to deliver. Second wave of BI is more the analysts. So you have in each and every department in the organization, there are analysts building artifacts for their own department. So they're already more separated across the organization and more decentralized, actually. And that's what we can call self-service BI. If we look at a third wave of BI, it's literally everyone can start building data solutions in Power BI. And I'm not here today to market Power BI, although it is my job, kind of. But if we look at this, how we can deliver BI solutions from everyone in the organization to the end users, and how can everyone start doing this themselves, there are a lot of challenges that come with it. You don't want to create that mess that everyone is just publishing stuff to the Power BI service, sharing it with everyone, or even worse, publishing it to the web and publish your data out in the open. A lot of things around governance and administration of Power BI, that's not where I will focus on today. Things and challenges that also come with self-service and end-user BI, so with the second and third wave, is your data actually correct? And actually, everyone is doing everything up to their best knowledge. So where does this data come from? How do we control this? How do we make sure that what we report is actually the truth? How do we make sure that if we deliver something new, that we didn't break what we already delivered in the past iteration? Let's have a look at these three different pillars: the corporate BI, IT managed self-service BI, and the business-led self-service BI. These three pillars will describe the different ownerships and capabilities of each of these, and what are the different responsibilities that come with it. First, if we look at the approach, typically the approach for corporate BI will be top-down. It's IT pushing solutions to end users. If you look at the middle one, it is more a blended format. So basically, you deliver the data sets, but the end users can build the reports themselves. And completely to the right, we have the business-led self-service BI, so the third wave, where we start talking about bottom-up. Everyone can do everything, and they're pushing the solutions from a business perspective, with what's relevant to them, to their managers, and report to their managers about what they've done or what progress they made. If we look at the data sources, typically everything is published by IT for corporate BI, and all the way to the right, where you have any type of data source, varying from maybe SharePoint lists, Excel files, databases that they have access to, can be anything. Ownership has a similar split, but although ownership is in the middle section the most important. So the IT managed self-service BI is where IT will own and manage the data sets in the Power BI service. They will make sure that this represents one version of the truth, where the business users can start building their own reports on top of these data sets. Which basically means if they want a pie chart, they can build a pie chart. If they want another type of diagram, do whatever they think is the right thing to do. But there's one version of the truth, the outcome is 100, and it will not change because the data set is owned and managed by IT. The governance is in a similar split. So on the left-hand side, we have everything is end-to-end governed by IT. In the middle, we have IT is responsible for governance of the data sets and the data in it, of course, and the business for the reports. Where the business-led self-service, everything is up to the business, from source all the way to what they deliver in the reports. While the usage of scope is also slightly different. For corporate BI, end users are only consuming what was brought to them. Well, in the middle section, end users can create custom reports and dashboards, but they cannot touch the data set itself. They can only read the data set and use it in their reporting. And all the way to the right, end users can do anything. So they do the data preparation, the modeling, hopefully build a nice star schema out of it, the reporting on top of that, and dashboarding if they like. Finally, the endorsement. If you're familiar with endorsement, that's a feature in the Power BI service where you can give endorsement like a stamp to each solution that was built. If we talk about endorsement, a corporate BI solution, a completely managed solution, will get a certified stamp. Everything that's done here is validated, and we're 100% sure that is correct. The IT managed and self-service BI, the middle section, we can give that a promoted stamp. because the data is certified, but the reports on top of that are built by end users. So we can call that promoted. Well, everything that is completely self-service and end-user BI, so the business-led self-service BI, doesn't get any endorsement stamp at all. These are the 3 default endorsements that you can set in the Power BI service, which is certified, promoted, or nothing at all. We translate it to percentages, which is sometimes easier to explain. On the left-hand side, it's 100% IT-driven. In the middle section, it's a 50-50 split. And on the right-hand side, it's 100% business-driven. Also, if you look at the challenges that come with these new BI capabilities today and the ability for everyone in the organization to start creating Power BI solution, it's a growing demand for BI. So everyone wants to get their insights faster, and we don't want to wait for IT to deliver it or a BI competence center to deliver it. We want it now. So there's a shorter time from ideation to actually delivering these solutions, which also means a faster development. There's a little to no room for mistakes, especially not for the end user or for the IT delivered solutions, because if you make a mistake, the end user will probably tell you, I would have done this better myself. And yes, I've been in these situations at some clients. But it also requires for us a more professional way to manage our content. We should look at a more professional way to release our content from stage to stage. And that requires some structure and standardization. So I briefly talk now about 3 different pillars: IT managed content all the way to completely end user managed content. Let's have a look at different deployment frameworks, also for the small cases for self-service purposes, but also for larger deployments for end use or for IT, where they can actually, how you can benefit from the features in Power BI or integration with other services to make that deployment process smoother and faster. If we look at a deployment scenario and we assume that we are a Power BI developer, we have a Power BI developer on the left bottom. And as we talk about a small scale here, it is likely that this user has at least one workspace. Maybe it's his own personal workspace, or it is a shared workspace. But he can publish his content in that workspace easily. Every Power BI file, a PBIX file, if you publish it, will become actually a split in at least 2 things in the Power BI service: the data set and the report. And if you will, in the Power BI service, you can build a dashboard on top of that. These artifacts live in the Power BI service now on the top. But as we are still in developing phase and we want to keep that pace high because we want to add new requirements to it and deliver these artifacts faster. So we have a continuous loop of feedback with our key users that have also access to the same workspace. They can continuously provide us feedback with features in the Power BI service like comments. They can directly put comments on the content that they look at. As soon as this feedback loop is closed and they can actually tell, okay, we're confident with the content as it is right now, we can publish it in the same workspace if you like, if you want to keep it small and understandable, but remove something simple like a prefix. Because as you can see, the downstream, the development artifacts have a prefix that tells us that it's a development artifact. The top one is the only one, is the production-ready setup that will be published as an app for view-only consumption to the end users. So maybe if you talk about the middle section where an analyst follows this process, the analyst will publish it as an app to the rest of his department. Some easy things that you can apply, which is fairly easy, and if you ask me, in any case it could be useful, is the usage of parameters. And why should you use parameters in this case? I just explained to you, you can easily prefix some things simply in the naming, nothing special there. But it's very likely that not only your Power BI file will have a development and a production setup at least, maybe also a test setup if you want to have 3 stages. But your data source that you're connecting to is likely to have the same setup. So how do you easily switch the data source behind it without rebuilding everything, or in Power BI Desktop switching the data source, which require you to load the full data set in Power BI Desktop first, and your computer might run out of memory. So what I'm going to demo you in the first demo today is a very simple setup. I created a typical end user scenario. I dropped some Excel files on the SharePoint site. I created 2 folders, and I got a development folder and a production folder. In the development folder, I only put 1 file, only the first 500 records, I believe. And in the production folder, I put roughly 2,500 files, or 2,500 records of data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy this to a Power BI workspace and easily switch the parameters there. Because I'm going to use a parameter to switch from the development data source, folder A, to the production data source in folder B. So let me move over to Power BI Desktop here, and first show you how fairly easy it is to set this up. What I have right here is a data set that basically contains field transactions from that I created with my own car, but also some cars for my colleagues, and field transactions that we did with our company cars. In this case, we talk about 4 cars. It's a very ugly Power BI report, so I didn't spend any time on the visualization here, because that's not completely what I wanted to show you. So we have four cars here, and we see a split over time about the fuel transactions, and in total we have 500 transactions here. So let's go into the query editor. And here in the query editor, you can see that I set up a parameter here. And I call this the environment switch, or give it whatever name you want to give it. In this case, I made it a drop-down menu. And this drop-down menu lets me choose between /dev/ and /production/. As you can see, there is another Power Query connected to it, another expression connected to it, which reads this parameter and defines where it should look for the data. Let's have a look at the SharePoint folder where we actually see this data. So here in the browser, I'm connecting to SharePoint, and we see these 2 folders. So in the development folder, I only got 1 file. But in the production folder, I got, well, this is 5 files. And all these 5 files add up to roughly 2,500 records. So in Power BI Desktop, I can easily switch between folder A or folder B by changing this parameter. The setup of this parameter is actually pretty simple. The only thing that I did here is include a list of values which filter the URL for me. So they define whether it should look at the SharePoint slide /dev or the SharePoint slide /production. There's something that you have to keep in mind. I can easily set up a list of values here, which will help me in Power BI Desktop to make this easy switch with a simple drop-down menu. Unfortunately, at this moment, there is no way to use this drop-down menu in the Power BI service. In the Power BI service, this drop-down menu does not appear. So my advice would be, what I actually didn't do in this demo, is to list all the potential values that a user can enter as options here in the description of the parameter. Because these descriptions will be visible in the Power BI service, which makes it easier for you to change these values. So imagine that we just switched here to the production data set. So we change this drop-down menu quickly to production, and we see that in a second we have 5 files. As soon as I click close and apply, it will start loading the complete 2,500 record data set. This should go fine if the Wi-Fi connection is with me, or the internet connection. There we go. So now we have 2,500 transactions. Imagine that you're doing this with your whatever database system that you have in your organization, and you start loading billions of rows of data in your production. You don't want to do this in Power BI Desktop. So let me go to the Power BI service and show you how fairly easy it is to change this parameter in the Power BI service. To show you that, I'm quickly going to go to one of my Power BI workspaces where I publish this very same Power BI file. So here we have the data set and the report. But as soon as I go into my dataset settings, I can find the same setup here. So here we have the parameter, and I can specify the value of this parameter. In this case, it is already set to production, but I can easily switch it here to another value. Please keep in mind that as soon as you change something like this, you always first have to refresh your dataset before the change applies. Having that said, let's keep this in mind for a second and go back to the slides and see how we can automate this process as well when we start talking and start using Power BI deployment pipelines. What I'm going to do, as I created snapshots of everything that I did, I'm going to quickly skip over some slides. because I just demoed it to you, so we don't need the snapshots. Let's have a look at deployment pipelines. And deployment pipelines is a feature that comes with Power BI Premium. It's a feature that comes with any type of Power BI Premium. So it can be either premium per user, or it can be a full-blown premium capacity. The cool thing about this is that you can set up a pipeline that helps you to move your content from development to test and from test to production in an automated way. You don't have to do this work yourself manually by changing it to different workspaces. If you do it manually, it's due to at some point fail and have some mistakes. Where if you automate it, you configure it once, you test it, and if you are, and you can take advantage of it in the long run by completely running everything to the same pipeline. How does these deployment pipelines work? Well, basically, it is a metadata deployment. So it is not deploying your data from A to B. It's only deploying the definition of your data set and only the definition of your reports. So we can also talk about an incremental deployment, because you can also say, I only want to deploy this data set, but not the report, because that's not production ready yet. So you can select whatever you want to deploy. Something that you have to also keep in mind is your production workspace must be a full-blown premium capacity or premium per user. In earlier stages, so development and test, it is allowed to also use different types of capacities, like an Azure embedded capacity or an embedded premium capacity. Something else to talk about is there's no versioning yet. So we talk about, with deployment pipelines, how you move content from A to B, but not yet about how you can handle the versioning. What if I completely messed up my solution and I'm overriding it in production? How do I roll back? Well, that is not possible at this moment with deployment pipelines. In a second, I will talk about Azure DevOps and show you how you can make this to work with Azure DevOps combined with deployment pipelines. So a deployment pipeline looks like this, basically. You see 3 different stages. On the left-hand side, we have development, in the middle, test, and on the right-hand side, production. Today, Power BI deployment pipelines are limited to 3 stages. You can decide to only use 2 if you like, or only use 1, but then there's no point of using deployment pipelines. But there's no way to add a 4th stage, for example. As you can see, in the left-hand side, in red highlighted, you see a few items selected. If I want, I can deploy these items to the next stage, and then they will appear in the test stage. I can manually select them, or let Power BI do a quick comparison for me if there's any difference between development and test. Other than that, there are also things like deployment settings. I just showed you how you can change your data source based on a parameter. But what if we automate this process, that as soon as we deploy it to test, it should load the different data set. And as soon as I deploy it to production, it should connect to my production data source. So let's have a look at how that works in practice and go back to the browser here. So here we are. This is the Power BI deployment pipeline. You will find the deployment pipelines on the left-hand side in the menu in the Power BI service. Make sure that you have any type of premium, otherwise this will not be available to you. As you can see, I already connected 3 different workspaces here. But let me quickly disconnect the production. So I'm going to click Unassign Workspace. And you can see that it is fairly easy to assign workspaces here. I have a simple drop-down menu where all my workspaces that are backed by any type of premium are shown in a drop-down. I can simply select the one that I want to assign here, and I assign the workspace. Only the workspaces are shown which I have access to with sufficient permissions, which is admin or member, to assign it to this pipeline. Other than that, there's in the settings of this pipeline, I can simply give it a name and a description if I like. Also, you have the access menu, which you will probably recognize from a default Power BI workspace where you can assign permissions for users or groups to this pipeline. This little toggle here helps you to directly assign the permissions from the pipeline also to all connected workspaces. So if I have access to the pipeline, these same permissions will be shared to all the workspaces. Here you see that I have 2 users connected and a service principal that we will talk about in a second. So if I simply click these little drop-down menus here, you can see that it shows me that, in this case, my development workspace and my test workspace are identical. There is no change here. However, you see the orange mark here between test and production, which is showing me that there is actually a difference. What I can do is click the quick comparison button, and here it will show me there are 2 new items that are not available in my production workspace. What I can do now is either just select one item, I only want to deploy this one item, or I can say deploy all. Also, what I can do is select the pre-deployment or the deployment variables and the deployment rules. So what you can see here, I got a data set, one data set and one report. Each stage in test and development, not available for or test and production, not available for development, has this little lightning icon. And with this lightning icon, I can set rules to my data set. So we have the data set called demo parameter, and as soon as I click that, I can define rules. 2 types of rules are supported. In this case, I can change the parameter value, for example, from development to production, as I've just showed you, or I can also add data source rules. So if I have a connection string for my development database, I can easily change that automatically to the connection string for my test database and to my production database. These rules will be applied as soon as you run the deployment, so you don't have to change this anymore manually. Let's just see how easy it is to run a deployment now, and by simply clicking the Deploy to Production button. In a second, all the content will appear here. As I told you, it will only deploy the metadata, so the data itself will not be copied. So as soon as I open the data set or the report in the production stage in a second, you'll see that it's all empty. There's no data there. Something else that you should not forget is also to re-enter your credentials for your data source, because those will also not be deployed from stage to stage, as you might have permissions for your development stage data source, but not to your production system. So this is a security reason why they're not copied over these different stages as well. Something else that could be interesting is you can also publish the related app from a workspace. So if you have content published from a workspace in an app, there's a button here directly to publish the app for this workspace as well, without leaving the pipeline. This is fairly simple how we can do this. As soon as I publish something new to the development stage, it will show me again the orange icon that there is a difference, and I can move it from development to test and from test to production. However, how can we take this setup to the next level? Before we're getting there, I want to quickly point out this blog post that I wrote a while ago, basically 1.5 years ago, where I describe all these things about deployment pipelines and why I think deployment pipelines are necessary in your setup working with Power BI. Other than that, there's something that I want to share with you about that premium setup. I told you that every stage workspace, so development, test, and production, should be backed by any type of premium. As you probably know, premium is not the most cheap solution that you can use. So what you will see is that every workspace is backed on the same premium capacity. Well, for me, typically as a developer, as soon as I develop something new, I publish it to the development workspace and I start hitting the refresh button, because I want to see if it did what I expected it to do. Because simply not everything can be tested in the Power BI desktop. So if everything is on the same premium capacity, I'm directly contributing to the capacity utilization, which means that it could potentially happen that I'm taking down this capacity and with a negative effect on the production environment, because it's running on the same capacity. So what can you do? Or you can decide to buy another premium capacity, which is pretty expensive. So if you have enough money in your company, do it, but there are definitely other solutions as well. You can also choose to put your development and your test workspace on an ASKU, which is an Azure capacity, which you can pause and resume as any other Azure resource. This type of capacity is not allowed for production use, so you can do it for development and test, but not in production. However, the alternative that you can also consider to use is premium per user, and mixing it with premium per user. So what you can do is put development and test workspaces on premium per user, where you only put your production workspace on a premium capacity. With that, you can directly lower the capacity utilization on your premium capacity, but still benefit from everything that the premium capacity has in all 3 stages. This also means that each developer that is contributing to this Power BI workspace needs to have a premium per user license, because everyone viewing or contributing to something in premium per user must also have a premium per user license. So in this picture, all my Power BI developers must have a premium per user license, and also the testers in the test workspace must have premium per user. I also described this in a blog post, so again, you will see the URL of my blog on the right bottom as well. But I described in the blog post how you can leverage premium per user in combination with deployment pipelines. Now let's have a look at how we can take this to the next level with Azure DevOps at a larger scale and for larger organizations. When we start talking about Azure DevOps, I think it's good to do a short introduction of Azure DevOps. And Azure DevOps is a different Microsoft service that allows you to run your projects and orchestrate your projects in general. So it has some functionality that's called Azure Boards, where you can keep track of your sprint and your backlog, etc., where you can see everything that your team should be working on and refine all your items, etc. Other things that come with Azure DevOps are pipelines, which we will use in a second to automate our deployment process, as well as Azure Repos, which is your repository where you can start doing your versioning. Last but not least, you also have Azure Test Plans and Azure Artifacts, and there's a full marketplace with extensions that you can add to Azure DevOps. What we will primarily use in combination with Power BI is Azure Pipelines. And Azure Pipelines help us to automate processes with to build artifacts together from our repository and put that into a destination, which is our Power BI workspace in this case. So what we're going to do is we integrate Azure DevOps. We're going to leverage some of the Power BI REST APIs, and we need the Power BI service, obviously, because that's where we will deploy our content. And we're going to do that by using this framework. So basically, this framework looks a little bit different than what we just saw on a small scale, because with Power BI deployment pipelines, we have 3 different stages. And these 3 different stages are development, test, and production. So me as a Power BI developer, I'm on the left bottom. I'm just going to build our Power BI solution, which is resulting in a PBIX file. This PBIX file is what I'm going to push in a branch. And this branch is my local development branch. And this branch is where I'm the only contributor. I'm building this new artifact, which is linked to this one item on my Azure DevOps board if I'm tracking my progress there. As soon as I'm done with that, I can commit this new PBIX file to this branch, and it will be automatically published to my development workspace. So it is directly available in my Power BI workspace. So that's this process that we have right here. As soon as I'm confident that I finish this task, I will merge the development branch with the master branch, and it will start a continuous integration process where it will publish the master artifact, which is packaged together, to my UAT or test workspace. In this workspace, my testers have access. They can, again, test everything, see if it is matching the requirements, and if they hit the approve button, then it will automatically deploy everything that I have in this master artifact to the production workspace. And in production, we have the Power BI app connected where my end users will interact to, and we have the ability to share this data set with build permissions for others that want to leverage my data set and build new reports on top. In this picture, I'm doing everything orchestrated from Azure DevOps. However, there's also an option that we can actually leave out some of these elements and combine Azure DevOps with the native Power BI deployment pipelines. I will demo that in a second. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to integrate Azure DevOps with Power BI deployment pipelines as I've just shown you. So I'm going to do my versioning in Azure DevOps, and as soon as I have something ready there, I publish it automatically to Power BI service. And from there on, I'm going to move the content from development to test and to production with the native deployment pipelines. So let's go back to the browser again, and here we are in Azure DevOps. In Azure DevOps, it's a full package, a full service, and here we have everything on the left menu that we need. So we have our repositories, and in this repository, I can directly see that I have a Power BI file here. I got a Power BI file, just a PBIX file, which is checked into this repository. With a repository, I directly have versioning capabilities available. Because every time I upload a new file here, one of my pipelines will run. And that is this pipeline, basically. And you can see that it last run on the 4th of March in this case. This basically resulted in the artifact which is called main. So that's my master artifact, where everything is grouped together. If I click on this, and I should have clicked on the right place, if I click on this, I can see all the times that this pipeline has run, and that in this case it only succeeded once. As soon as I click Run Pipeline, it will create a new package for me, and this new package is a new versioning, and basically a new version. So imagine that I messed up the version from the 4th of March, I can easily roll back to a newer version. If I run a new version right now, and I think that I made a mistake there, I can roll back to the version of the 3rd of, or the 4th of March. The number of versions to keep is something that you can configure yourself. So if I click this one, I can see that in a second it will show me here the artifacts, if the internet connection is with me. However, you can already see that there are 3 changes, and these 3 changes are reflected in this artifact here. This is the pipeline in itself, but we also have to run a release. And here we see the releases. You can see that the last time I tried to deploy it to production, it failed. And the reason why that failed is because I didn't have a workspace connected. But I just connected the workspace in the previous demo, so I'm going to show you how it works end to end. What you also see is the little prefixes here that are representing the version of the files that I'm publishing. So as soon as I click Create Release, it's up to me to define here which version I want to deploy. So there are other versions here that I can easily select from a drop-down in case I want to do a rollback. Each pipeline that is running here is pre-configured. So this release pipeline basically tells me or lets me configure what I want to develop or what I want to do in development, what I want to do for test, and what I want to do for production. As you can see here, each stage has one task. And this task here in this case is create a report. Creating a report in my case here means that I'm creating a new Power BI report in the Power BI service. And as you can see, it's specified here with an extension or a service connection, which explains that service principle that you just saw in the pipeline. So I'm using a technical authentication between Azure DevOps and Power BI service, because I don't want to do that with my personal user, as I have multi-factor authentication applied on my user. This is a technical connection which receives an access token and then can authorize to Power BI, execute some tasks for me, and then, as any other user, the access token will expire. This task, in this case, will create a new Power BI report for me. There are some other things that you can do, like updating parameters, deleting content, whatever you like. I could have specified the workspace name, but here I choose to use the workspace GUID, so the ID. It's up to you what you do. And here you see that I selected this file from my repository that I want to deploy. In this case, I pointed to one specific PBIX file. If I want, I can also point to a folder and deploy everything that is in this folder. This is what I will do for the development stage. For the test stage, I will do something different. Because for test, I want to pick up all the content that I have in development and move that to test, instead of uploading it again from Azure DevOps. So if we're going to look at the other stages, and we move here to the test stage, you will see that I'm using a different task. And the task that I'm using here is deploy content to test stage. And this is a name that you can specify yourself. But here I'm using a pipeline. One of the deployment pipelines that I already showed you quickly. What I did here is define the pipeline ID, just like a workspace ID. Every pipeline also got an ID. And what I'm going to do is here select that I want to deploy to the test stage. That's my target. That's what I want to go to. But I can also say I want to go to production, or I want a backwards deployment from test back to development. Other than that, I can define what it needs to do. Does it need to deploy everything or only one artifact that I can specify, or should it override existing artifacts, and should it also update the app related to this workspace or not? Now it's time to just hit the run button and see how this thing works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my pipeline and just create a release. And I just create, I cannot even specify a description if I like. For now, I just hit the button. And what it's doing now, it's waiting for an Azure runtime to be available. A service of this is of Azure DevOps is that it's running on Azure runtime machines, so basically virtual machines that are going to execute the tasks for me. This usually takes a little moment, and here you see that it's ready, so it starts running, and it's starting to execute that one job that I just explained to you. You see that it's showing a little warning here as probably something went wrong on the back end, but I can go directly into the logs and see what it's doing. Or probably something will be deprecated by the 15th of March. You can see that it's spinning up some actually PowerShell modules that help me to execute these tasks. So in a second we see here that everything should be ready, and let's have a look in Power BI if it is actually the case. So let me refresh this pipeline. And we now actually have 2 data sets and 2 reports in this Power BI development workspace. So we managed to deploy something from Azure DevOps into the Power BI service. There's now a little difference between the development and the test workspace, so let's also run the deployment to test. We're going back to our release, and you see a pre-deployment approval pending. With Azure DevOps, you can also specify pre-deployment approvals, where I can specify that, for example, my colleague should double-check my work before I can move to the next stage. So I cannot control everything for my own work, because I want the 4I principle, where they're going to look at my content before it's going to hit production. In this case, I set a pre-deployment approval for both test and production, and I can approve my own work in this case. Otherwise, the demo would be quite lengthy. And I can simply hit the approve button, which then will run the deployment to the test stage. So again, it waits a second to have an Azure runtime, and it will run the deployment pipeline to move everything from the development stage to the test stage. So in a second, that should also be ready. And it is queued right now, so let's give it another moment, and there we go. The warning that we see appearing here is most likely the same one. So let's click on the logs, and we see indeed that it's showing the same one. And here we see all the options that we specified as part of this task in the PowerShell script appearing as well. So allow takeover set to false, and some more other settings that you can define. So in a second, yeah, and we're ready. So let's refresh our pipeline and see if it actually moved the content. And we see that there's no difference anymore between development and test. So we managed to move all the content managed and orchestrated from Azure DevOps, and actually trigger the deployment pipeline to move everything from development to test. For the sake of time, I'm not going to demo the exact same task again to move content from test to production, but as you can see, there's now another approval pending to move it to production, which does exactly the same thing basically, but the destination is then the production workspace. So again, a few slides for if the demo didn't work. There are a few things that you should keep in mind when you start doing this, and that's basically make sure that your permissions are set correctly. I use a technical authentication, which is the service principal, and you have to make sure that the service principal has access to every workspace related in this pipeline, so development, test, and production. Also grant permissions to the service principal that it can talk to Power BI. There is something in the Power BI admin settings, in the tenant settings, where you have to specify that service principals are allowed to authenticate to Power BI, and maybe even there is a list of service principals that are only allowed, if not everything is allowed. Also, the extension that I use in DevOps where all these tasks are integrated, there are two. There's one that I built at my employer together with a colleague. So that's the Macaw extension. Link will be there in a second. And there's another extension from Microsoft, which is currently in preview, which will do only the pipeline orchestration task. So that doesn't allow you to upload the file from DevOps to the service. Everything that I showed you today and how this whole orchestration works is again written down in a blog post that you can find on my website, where you also will find a link to download this extension. By the way, it is for free. You can just download it. Everything works for free. We are not limiting you in any way. So you can get that online. We didn't talk about data flows yet, because data flows is something you build in the Power BI service, which means we cannot really put versioning on top of that by checking it into our Azure DevOps environment and then moving it from stage to stage. Something that you could consider to do is integrate a task in Azure DevOps, which also downloads the data flows. There is an API which allows you to download the definition of a data flow and then puts that in your repository. That is something you could consider to do. We didn't make that part of the deployment pipeline yet. Although this API is again described on the blog. All links will be there in a second. So data flows are supported in a native Power BI deployment pipeline, so moving them from dev to test and to production works seamlessly integrated in the pipelines. That's no challenge anymore. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip over some of these slides and move to the most relevant one in this case, which is this one. A quick comparison between both. As you can see, in most cases, I prefer to use DevOps over only using the deployment pipelines. And that's basically the main reason is that I can control a little bit more, and things like versioning that is integrated in DevOps, which is not part of the native deployment pipelines. And the same for the pre-deployment approvals, which I think is very powerful to integrate in your end-to-end process. In all cases, it is possible to work with multiple users and multiple users in the DevOps repository. And in both cases, you can also integrate the data flow deployment with it. Other than that, this is the extension. Link is also there in a second in the last slide that we built at Macaw, and we have the extension for Microsoft, which is also available in the same marketplace in Azure DevOps, where you can download them all directly. You can also mix and match if you like. So if you prefer to use the Microsoft extension but only want to use the Macaw extension for uploading the file, feel free to do whatever you think is the right thing to do. A quick wrap up. I personally think that professionalizing your deployment process with Azure DevOps will only do good to your end-to-end orchestration and the controllability of your entire solution. Something that I think is very powerful is the ease of a rollback in case you need to do that with Azure DevOps, especially with the integrated versioning, but also if you need to roll back from production to test or from test to development, in case that you messed up in your earlier workspace. Versioning can today only be achieved with additional services like Azure DevOps and not yet with native deployment pipelines. But however, deployment pipelines is definitely worth using if you have the availability of some sort of Power BI premium, either premium per user or premium capacity. But I think integration is even more powerful. So one last note, combine them as I think they are better together. Thank you all for attending. I would really appreciate your feedback with a QR code or directly with the link. And if you use the link on top and search for deployment on my website, you will directly find all related blog posts that I quickly showed you. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask them now. Yes. Mm-hmm. So the question is, what if my data model takes a long time to refresh, and I move my content from test to production? Will my model still be available, or will it have downtime? Actually, the answer is that it does a metadata deployment if I deploy from test to production. So I'm not overwriting my data set, and my old data set will still be available until the next refresh is finished. Refreshing is not a part of the pipeline at this moment. However, you can integrate a task if you like to also trigger the refresh directly with an API. Question is, does it retain partitions or do you have to do a full refresh? If the partition and definition of the partitions are the same in earlier stages, it will retain the partitions. If the partition definition is changed, it will override that because you're overriding the metadata.
I've got a couple of questions from online.
Yes.
The first one was, can you take a code backup of a native Power BI deployment pipeline, i.e. download it, store it in your repo somewhere?
Question is it possible to take a code backup of the native Power BI deployment pipeline and store it somewhere? As far as I know, that's not possible.
Okay, that was the first question. Then I've got another question from Kazim about the Power BI white paper says to have different workspaces for your data sets and your reports. When you're using pipelines or when you're using deployment, are there any downsides that you're aware of?
Okay, so the question is, the Power BI white paper, which is one of in the Microsoft documentation, says that it is better to have separated workspaces for data sets and reports. How does that affect the usage of Power BI deployment pipelines? Today, you cannot, if they're in separated workspaces, they will be disconnected, and if you move your data set to a new workspace, it will still point, or the report will still point to the old data set in the previous stage. So you have to do some API call to rebind the report to the other data set. However, this is something that is on the public roadmap and is going to change, that you can have multiple pipelines working together, that as soon as you move to the next stage, the other pipeline also will react to that. Yes, last question. So the question is, how can you do incremental deployment and you don't want to reset everything? For example, you want to specify that one data set that you want to deploy. What is happening with the deployment pipeline is that you can select, I only want to deploy this data set or this report, but there's no way to say, I only want to deploy this table. So the level on which you can specify what you can deploy is on artifact level and not really a lower granularity in the data set or report itself. However, if you want to do certain tasks and only deploy one table, then my advice would be to have a look at ALM Toolkit, which is a tool that you can download on the internet, which is doing a code comparison between two data sets. And then you can say, I only want to deploy this table or only this measure, and you can specify what you want to deploy. So what if you only want to change a report? With a native deployment pipelines, I can also select only one report that I want to deploy, and it will bind to the next stage data set and will retain that connection. So that will work fine, but there's no way to deploy only one visual. But in a report, it's very hard to get a metadata out of that. So it will always just deploy the full report to the next stage. Okay, if there are any questions left, please feel free to walk by. I'm happy to answer them. Last reminder, there's still coasters and stickers here up front. Feel free to grab them if you like. Thank you so much.